The room was filled with polite smiles and restrained applause, the kind that followed. Expensive weddings where everything looked perfect but felt carefully measured. Crystal glasses caught the light. White linens draped every table. Soft laughter floated between guests who were dressed for celebration, not conflict. At the front of the room stood Rowan Hale. He looked confident, relaxed, certain. This was his wedding day. Again, a fresh start, according to everyone who mattered to him. Rowan lifted his glass, waiting for the room to settle. Conversations quieted, heads turned. Phones rose discreetly, ready to capture the moment that would be replayed later, with approving nods. He smiled. Not warmly, proudly. "Thank you all for being here," he began, his voice steady, practiced. "This day means a lot to me. It's not just about love, it's about finally choosing the right future." A few guests chuckled softly. Others leaned in. Rowan continued, pacing his words like a man who believed he had earned the right to speak freely. "Sometimes," he said, pausing just long enough to command attention, "you have to walk away from what holds you back, so you don't waste your life waiting for what will never come." The room stilled. At the back of the hall, seated quietly near the last row, Nia Brooks felt the words land before she fully understood them. She hadn't planned to be noticed. She hadn't planned to stay long. Curiosity had brought her there, nothing more. Rowan's eyes flicked briefly in her direction, just once. Then he smiled again and raised his glass higher. "I'm grateful," he said, his tone light but sharp underneath. "That I didn't stay stuck in a situation that couldn't give me a family." A ripple passed through the room. Some guests shifted uncomfortably. Others laughed, assuming it was harmless honesty. No one spoke. Nia didn't react, not outwardly. She didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She simply sat there, hands folded in her lap, her posture calm, her expression unreadable. Rowan went on. "We all deserve a life that moves forward," he added. "A future that actually grows." The applause came, scattered at first, then louder, encouraged by the bride's smile and the expectation that this was normal, that this was acceptable, that whatever past Rowan referenced no longer mattered. But Nia knew. Every word had been aimed, not at the guests, not at the moment. At her. She stood slowly. No dramatic movement, no rush. A few heads turned as she stepped into the aisle. Her heels made soft sounds against the polished floor, measured, unhurried. She didn't look toward the altar again. She didn't need to. The insult had already done its work. As she walked toward the exit, Rowan watched her go. For half a second, something crossed his face. Not guilt, not doubt, relief. Nia pushed open the doors and stepped outside into the quiet, her breathing steady, her chin lifted. She did not cry. She did not pause. She did not look back. Inside, the celebration continued. No one followed her. No one asked questions. And Rowan raised his glass once more, unaware that the woman he had just reduced to, a memory carried with her a truth powerful enough to one day shake his entire world. Have you ever been blamed for something you couldn't control? Not yelled at, not cursed out, just quietly held responsible, like someone handed you shame that didn't belong to you and expected you to carry it in silence. That's what Nia Brooks lived through. She didn't cheat. She didn't lie. She didn't walk away from her vows. What she did was try. She went to every doctor's appointment, took every test, swallowed every pill that might improve their chances. She changed her diet, prayed harder, smiled through dinners where questions about children hung over every conversation like a shadow. Still, nothing changed, except Rowan. His tone grew sharp when no one else was around. His patience thinned. His disappointment settled into quiet accusations. "You sure the doctor checked everything? Maybe it's just your body. This wouldn't be happening if you came from stronger genes." Words like that didn't echo. They stuck. Nia never raised her voice, never called her mother crying. She just kept trying to fix something she didn't break. Until the day came when Rowan stopped looking at her with love and started looking at her like she was in the way. And even then, she stayed a little longer. She thought love meant endurance. She thought faith meant waiting. Until she realized staying was teaching her daughters, if she ever had them, how to survive silence instead of fight for dignity. So she left, not out of anger, but self-respect. She packed her things and walked back to the only place where she knew the truth wouldn't be used against her, her mother's house. And while Rowan started planning a wedding to someone else, Naya was learning how to live without being blamed. It's a strange thing, isn't it? How quiet pain can be. How your whole world can collapse and nobody sees the rubble because you swept it yourself. She didn't make a scene. She didn't text friends in rage. She didn't retaliate. She just walked away, with no apology, no closure, and nothing but the little bit of dignity she had left. Rowan didn't just let her go. He humiliated her. On the day he stood at the altar with another woman, wearing the same watch Nia once saved 3 paychecks to buy him, he decided to turn a wedding toast into a final blow. Naya wasn't supposed to be there, but she came, not for drama, not to win him back, just to remind herself it was real. That she didn't make it all up, that once upon a time, he chose her too. She stood quietly near the back, half hidden behind a pillar, wearing a long navy blue dress that hugged her modestly but spoke of grace. She hadn't worn makeup. She hadn't come to impress. She had come to release. And then the microphone picked up his voice. "Some relationships," Rowan said, with a charming laugh that only people who didn't know better would believe, teach you what you don't want. Guests laughed. The new bride blushed. He wasn't finished. "I'm just thankful I didn't waste my life waiting on someone who couldn't give me a family." It wasn't a jab. It was a dart, thrown directly at the woman in the shadows. Naya didn't move. She didn't cry, didn't clench her fists, didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She turned, walked out of the room, head held high, heart heavy. She didn't know her world was already shifting. She didn't know life had planted something holy inside her. That night, her body ached. She assumed it was the stress, the weight of it all catching up with her. 2 weeks later, in a quiet medical clinic not far from her mother's house, a nurse pressed warm jelly over her belly and tilted a monitor screen. "You're going to want to sit up for this," the nurse said gently. Naya stared at the grainy image in silence, her chest tightening. The nurse smiled, paused, then said what would rewrite everything. "You're pregnant." Naya blinked. The nurse squinted at the screen again, adjusting the probe. With twins, time paused. Rowan had just stood in front of family, friends and strangers, declaring her body incapable of creating life. But inside her, life was not only growing, it was multiplying. 2 hearts, 2 souls, 2 daughters, and not one of them would ever be defined by his disbelief. What happens when the same man who mocked you publicly, the one who called you broken, barren, a disappointment, turns around years later and sees his own eyes staring back at him, not in the mirror, but in the faces of 2 little girls he never knew existed? What happens when the man who said you couldn't give him a family is suddenly standing in front of the family you built without him? Years passed. Naya didn't chase him, didn't call, didn't send a single word. She focused on raising her daughters. Zuri, who was curious and bold. Zola, who loved rhythm and color. She worked, studied, sacrificed, not for revenge, but for restoration. And all the while, Rowan lived on, unaware, until fate did what pride could not prevent. It brought them back into the same room. This time, it wasn't a wedding. It wasn't an insult. It wasn't about ego. It was about truth. And truth walks on its own time. It doesn't shout. It doesn't beg to be believed. It just arrives, unshakable, undeniable, unbothered by denial. So when Rowan looked across that brightly lit charity gala 8 years later, and saw a woman with quiet power and 2 girls laughing beside her, he paused. Their laughter, their posture, their smile, his, and when Naya met his gaze, She didn't blink. She walked up, calm, whole, unapologetic. "Rowan," she said, "these are your daughters." Silence fell like snow, slow and cold. "So, I ask you, what happens when life gives a man the exact miracle he once disrespected? What does he do? What does she do? What would you do?" Stick with me, because by the end of this story, you'll understand why some reunions break people and others rebuild them from scratch. Before we continue, if this story grabs your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to Mr. Victor Storytime, and drop a comment below. Do people deserve second chances, or only the ones they truly earn? Durham was slow that Sunday afternoon. The kind of southern slow that didn't mean lazy, just intentional. Like the day itself had chosen rest. After morning service, half the city seemed to gather at the Lakeside Community Pavilion near Old Hopewell Road. There was the smell of smoked chicken, cornbread, and sweet tea sweating in styrofoam cups. Aunties in floral dresses fanned themselves under shade tents, while little boys, in clip-on ties, kicked off their shoes to chase each other through the grass. Gospel music played from a single Bluetooth speaker that someone had balanced on top of a cooler. Nia Brooks stood near a table, arranging stacks of bottled water with quiet precision. Her mustard-colored dress was simple, long, and loose around the waist. A silk scarf wrapped around her head, neat, respectful, effortlessly graceful. She didn't speak unless needed. She wasn't shy, just observant. Her presence had weight, not loud, but grounding. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like things would be all right, even if they weren't yet. Across the pavilion, Rowan Hale stepped out of a black SUV, glancing at his phone before tucking it away. His shirt was too crisp for the occasion. His shoes, polished leather loafers, sank awkwardly into the grass. He wore a blue button-down and slacks, sleeves rolled once, trying to appear relaxed. He looked like someone who came from a place where life was always rushing. And in that moment, he absolutely did not belong. But he was there on behalf of his consulting firm, which had recently donated to the community outreach project that funded college prep programs in the local area. His supervisor insisted someone presentable attend the fundraiser. Rowan, being the youngest associate and the least likely to say no, got the task. He didn't complain. He just showed up. He greeted a few organizers, shook hands, and tried not to check his watch. He found himself standing near the drink table next to Nia, who was wiping down condensation from the lids of Gatorade jugs. Rowan cleared his throat. "You're in charge of hydration?" he asked. Nia looked up briefly, only for the ones smart enough not to pass out in this heat. He smiled, slightly surprised. "Fair point," he said. "I'm Rowan." She didn't offer her name immediately, just nodded. "You're not from around here." It wasn't an insult. It was truth, spoken gently. "No," he admitted. "I'm from Arlington, just moved to Durham a few months ago." She nodded again. Her eyes studied him, not judgmental, just curious. "Well, welcome," she said. "It's different down here. I'm starting to see that." They stood quietly for a moment, watching kids chase soap bubbles, and older folks debate which choir sang better at morning service. Nia reached into a cooler and handed him a cold bottle of water. "You're sweating through that fancy shirt," she said. Rowan accepted the water, his posture relaxing just a little. "Thanks. You always this direct?" "Only when it's hot," she said, letting a small smile touch her lips. He laughed. Not a big one, but honest. She noticed it, the kind of laugh that sounded like he hadn't used it in a while. Rowan didn't understand what it was about her. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't flirt. She didn't giggle. She didn't lean in when she spoke. But there was something about Nia's calm that unnerved him, in a way that made him want to sit still. It wasn't just her confidence, it was her certainty. Like she knew who she was, and didn't need anyone to confirm it. Over the next few weeks he found excuses to attend more community events. A food drive, a tutoring session, a church-hosted career fair. She was at every single one. He started asking questions, not about logistics, but about her. She didn't offer much, but what she gave was meaningful. Naya talked about her students. She worked as a part-time GED instructor at the local rec center. She shared her love for journaling, her mother's homemade peach preserves, her favorite scripture from the Book of Psalms. She spoke with softness, but never weakness. Rowan found it stabilizing. He was used to sharp people, fast talkers, competitive women who played the same boardroom chess he lived in. Naya didn't play games. She didn't perform. She just existed, with intention. Naya, on the other hand, found something in Rowan she didn't expect: discipline without arrogance. He wasn't overly confident. In fact, sometimes he seemed uncomfortable being noticed. But he listened. He asked questions that showed he cared. He never interrupted. And when he sat down to help a young boy figure out a math problem during one of the tutoring sessions, Naya watched quietly from a distance. There was tenderness beneath that structured exterior. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just trying to be useful. That's what caught her. Not his status. Not his words. His willingness to show up. Quietly. Their worlds could not have been more different. Naya grew up on Holloway Street, raised by her mother and grandmother after her father passed. Her childhood was filled with Sunday dinners, oil-stained porches, loud domino games, and laughter that came from the gut. She was raised to believe in prayer, in community, in the value of standing on your word. Rowan was raised in Arlington, Virginia, in a neighborhood where status meant everything. His father was a partner at a corporate law firm. His mother, always immaculately dressed, ran charity boards with more formality than a courtroom. There were no loud dinners in Rowan's house, only structured meals, assigned seats, conversations that felt like interviews. Rowan was taught to win, not to feel, to deliver, not to disappoint. His success was measured by outcomes, not effort. So when he entered Naya's world, a world of affection, prayer hands, and kids who hugged without asking, he was both intrigued and intimidated. He once asked Nia how she dealt with pressure. She said, "Pressure ain't the enemy. It's forgetting who you are under it that does the damage." He didn't forget that. She, in turn, learned about his childhood during a quiet moment after a community banquet. He spoke about always being told to be sharp, prepared, better than average. "How did that feel?" she asked him once. "Exhausting," he answered honestly. Naya understood. In her own way, she had carried burdens too, just different ones. They never tried to change each other. They just learned. And in that slow learning, something started growing. There were no fireworks, no whirlwind, just two people showing up, over and over again. They'd meet for late lunches after Naya's teaching sessions. They'd sit in her mother's kitchen eating cornbread and drinking sweet tea while her aunties debated the best old-school love songs. Rowan helped paint the fence outside her grandmother's house one weekend. The sweat rolling down his back didn't match the crispness he once arrived with, but the smile on his face said he didn't care. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be present. Naya started keeping his text messages, reading them twice, smiling at his awkward compliments. She liked that he didn't know how to flirt well, but tried anyway. He sent her flowers once, nothing store-bought. He asked a florist to match the scarf she always wore, mustard yellow with tiny ivory stitching. It wasn't romantic in the dramatic way, but it was real. She didn't rush. He didn't push. Their first kiss was quiet, outside her house, after a small church concert, with the air still warm and the crickets just starting to sing. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't desperate. It was honest. That night, Naya wrote in her journal, "I don't know if this is forever, but I know this is real, and for the first time in a long time. That's enough." Durham was slow that Sunday afternoon, the kind of southern slow that didn't mean lazy, just intentional, like the day itself had chosen rest. After morning service, half the city seemed to gather at the Lakeside Community Pavilion near Old Hopewell Road. There was the smell of smoked chicken, cornbread and sweet tea sweating in styrofoam cups. Aunties in floral dresses fanned themselves under shade tents, while little boys, in clip-on ties, kicked off their shoes to chase each other through the grass. Gospel music played from a single Bluetooth speaker that someone had balanced on top of a cooler. Nia Brooks stood near a table, arranging stacks of bottled water with quiet precision. Her mustard-colored dress was simple, long, and loose around the waist. A silk scarf wrapped around her head, neat, respectful, effortlessly graceful. She didn't speak unless needed. She wasn't shy, just observant. Her presence had weight, not loud, but grounding. She was the kind of woman who made you feel like things would be all right, even if they weren't yet. Across the pavilion, Rowan Hale stepped out of a black SUV, glancing at his phone before tucking it away. His shirt was too crisp for the occasion. His shoes, polished leather loafers, sank awkwardly into the grass. He wore a blue button-down and slacks, sleeves rolled once, trying to appear relaxed. He looked like someone who came from a place where life was always rushing. And in that moment, he absolutely did not belong. But he was there on behalf of his consulting firm, which had recently donated to the community outreach project that funded college prep programs in the local area. His supervisor insisted someone presentable attend the fundraiser. Rowan, being the youngest associate and the least likely to say no, got the task. He didn't complain. He just showed up. He greeted a few organizers, shook hands, and tried not to check his watch. He found himself standing near the drink table next to Nia, who was wiping down condensation from the lids of Gatorade jugs. Rowan cleared his throat. "You're in charge of hydration?" he asked. Nia looked up briefly, only for the ones smart enough not to pass out in this heat. He smiled, slightly surprised. "Fair point," he said. "I'm Rowan." She didn't offer her name immediately, just nodded. "You're not from around here." It wasn't an insult. It was truth, spoken gently. "No," he admitted. "I'm from Arlington. Just moved to Durham a few months ago." She nodded again. Her eyes studied him, not judgmental, just curious. "Well, welcome," she said. "It's different down here. I'm starting to see that." They stood quietly for a moment, watching kids chase soap bubbles, and older folks debate which choir sang better at morning service. Nia reached into a cooler and handed him a cold bottle of water. "You're sweating through that fancy shirt," she said. Rowan accepted the water, his posture relaxing just a little. "Thanks." "You always this direct?" "Only when it's hot," she said, letting a small smile touch her lips. He laughed. Not a big one, but honest. She noticed it. The kind of laugh that sounded like he hadn't used it in a while. Rowan didn't understand what it was about her. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't flirt. She didn't giggle. She didn't lean in when she spoke. But there was something about Nia's calm that unnerved him, in a way that made him want to sit still. It wasn't just her confidence, it was her certainty, like she knew who she was, and didn't need anyone to confirm it. Over the next few weeks, he found excuses to attend more community events, a food drive, a tutoring session, a church-hosted career fair. She was at every single one. He started asking questions, not about logistics, but about her. She didn't offer much, but what she gave was meaningful. Nia talked about her students. She worked as a part-time GED instructor at the local rec center. She shared her love for journaling, her mother's homemade peach preserves, her favorite scripture from the Book of Psalms. She spoke with softness, but never weakness. Rowan found it stabilizing. He was used to sharp people, fast talkers, competitive women who played the same boardroom chess he lived in. Nia didn't play games. She didn't perform. She just existed, with intention. Nia, on the other hand, found something in Rowan she didn't expect, discipline without arrogance. He wasn't overly confident. In fact, sometimes he seemed uncomfortable being noticed, but he listened. He asked questions that showed he cared. He never interrupted. And when he sat down to help a young boy figure out a math problem during one of the tutoring sessions, Nia watched quietly from a distance. There was tenderness beneath that structured exterior. He wasn't trying to impress. He was just trying to be useful. That's what caught her. Not his status, not his words. His willingness to show up. Quietly. Their worlds could not have been more different. Naya grew up on Holloway Street, raised by her mother and grandmother after her father passed. Her childhood was filled with Sunday dinners, oil-stained porches, loud domino games, and laughter that came from the gut. She was raised to believe in prayer, in community, in the value of standing on your word. Rowan was raised in Arlington, Virginia, in a neighborhood where status meant everything. His father was a partner at a corporate law firm. His mother, always immaculately dressed, ran charity boards with more formality than a courtroom. There were no loud dinners in Rowan's house, only structured meals, assigned seats, conversations that felt like interviews. Rowan was taught to win, not to feel, to deliver, not to disappoint. His success was measured by outcomes, not effort. So when he entered Naya's world, a world of affection, prayer hands, and kids who hugged without asking, he was both intrigued and intimidated. He once asked Naya how she dealt with pressure. She said, "Pressure ain't the enemy. It's forgetting who you are under it that does the damage." He didn't forget that. She, in turn, learned about his childhood during a quiet moment after a community banquet. He spoke about always being told to be sharp, prepared, better than average. How did that feel? She asked him once. Exhausting, he answered honestly. Naya understood. In her own way, she had carried burdens too, just different ones. They never tried to change each other. They just learned. And in that slow learning, something started growing. There were no fireworks, no whirlwind, just two people showing up, over and over again. They'd meet for late lunches after Naya's teaching sessions. They'd sit in her mother's kitchen eating cornbread and drinking sweet tea while her aunties debated the best old-school love songs. Rowan helped paint the fence outside her grandmother's house one weekend. The sweat rolling down his back didn't match the crispness he once arrived with, but the smile on his face said he didn't care. He wasn't trying to be a hero. He was just trying to be present. Naya started keeping his text messages, reading them twice, smiling at his awkward compliments. She liked that he didn't know how to flirt well, but tried anyway. He sent her flowers once, nothing store-bought. He asked a florist to match the scarf she always wore, mustard yellow with tiny ivory stitching. It wasn't romantic in the dramatic way, but it was real. She didn't rush. He didn't push. Their first kiss was quiet, outside her house, after a small church concert, with the air still warm and the crickets just starting to sing. It wasn't possessive. It wasn't desperate. It was honest. That night, Nia wrote in her journal, "I don't know if this is forever, but I know this is real. And for the first time in a long time, that's enough." Rowan Hale had never liked feeling powerless. He'd grown up believing control was synonymous with competence. His father didn't tolerate excuses. His mother managed every detail of their home like it was a private company. There was always a way to fix things, always a method, a solution, a measurable outcome. But this part of his life, the invisible waiting, the questions he couldn't answer, the silence, that followed every month, Naya didn't conceive. This was beyond his skill set. So he turned inward, and resentment, like rot, started spreading. He never said it outright, but the shift in him was obvious. He stopped engaging in conversations about hope. He no longer asked about doctor visits. When Naya tried to update him on what the specialists said, just to keep him involved, his answers grew clipped. "I've heard all this before. You sure this doctor knows what they're talking about? Maybe it's time to focus on something else." Underneath his words was a deep, nagging belief he wouldn't admit out loud, that her failure was somehow his burden, that people looked at him differently now, that he was living in a marriage that couldn't perform. Even when his colleagues asked harmless questions about plans for the future, Rowan felt exposed. "You two been married how long now? You're thinking about starting a family." He'd smile politely and deflect, but every time, something in him hardened. At work, he stayed later. He volunteered for out-of-town presentations. He started spending more time in silence, choosing headphones, background news, podcasts playing, at low volume, anything to avoid confronting the stillness that waited for him at home. And Naya noticed, not just the distance, but the tone, the lack of kindness in his eyes. the edge in his voice when she asked him to pray with her. "You think prayer fixes biology?" he snapped one night, tossing his jacket on the couch after a long meeting. She stood frozen in the hallway, her Bible still open in her hand. "No," she said quietly. "I think prayer keeps the bitterness from growing." He scoffed, didn't respond, walked past her like she was a stranger with nothing to offer. What she didn't realize yet was that Rowan wasn't only resenting her body, he was resenting her resilience. Because every time she found strength in her faith, it reminded him how weak he felt inside. They still lived under the same roof. But the intimacy that once gave their home its warmth now felt like a memory fading in real time. Rowan no longer kissed her forehead when he left in the mornings. He stopped texting her during lunch breaks, stopped asking what she was reading, stopped holding her hand at night. The emotional distance became physical without a single conversation. They still shared a bed, but it felt like they were lying in two different worlds. When Naya touched his arm gently in the night, he shifted away, not rudely, but intentionally. When she tried to plan something small, a dinner, a weekend walk even, an invitation to sit outside and watch the sky, he had excuses. "Work's been heavy. Let's do it another time. I'm tired." And yet, he always seemed to have energy for everything outside their home. She didn't argue. She just folded herself inward, started moving through the house quieter, started spending longer in the guest room when she needed to cry, started keeping her thoughts locked behind practiced smiles. But it chipped at her, not all at once, not dramatically. It chipped at her in small, invisible ways. When she stared at herself in the mirror and wondered what made her less than, when she found herself Googling fertility prayers late into the night, when she watched other women at church with toddlers and smiled, only to break down in the bathroom between hymns. Rowan noticed none of it. Or maybe he did, but acknowledging it would mean he'd have to take responsibility for what he was letting die. So he ignored her sadness, and she internalized it as failure. There's a particular kind of grief that comes when your body becomes the battleground for someone else's disappointment. And Naya felt every wound, but she kept showing up, kept cooking, kept folding laundry, kept leaving little notes in his lunch bag, even when they went unread. Because for a while, she believed that maybe, just maybe, if she stayed soft enough, he'd come back. The day it broke was quiet. There was no slam of doors, no shouting, no tears streaking mascara, just a conversation that started like any other and ended everything. Naya had been staring at the calendar, marking another missed cycle, another test, another hope fading. She was tired, not just physically, but emotionally exhausted from carrying the weight alone. So she approached him, calmly, at the kitchen counter as he poured himself a glass of water. "I think it's time we revisit the doctor," she said. "Together this time." He didn't look up. "Naya," he said, "we've done enough." She folded her hands. "I don't think we have." He turned. His face was blank, his voice even. "I'm not spending another year chasing something that clearly isn't going to happen." The room went still. "I just want to know that we tried everything," she said, holding her ground. Rowan sighed, set his glass down. "I have tried," he said coldly. "You're the one who keeps trying to prove something. I've accepted the truth." Her throat tightened. "What truth?" "That this isn't working," he replied. "Or that I'm not working?" she asked, the words falling before she could stop them. He didn't answer, just walked past her, slowly, deliberately, and sat down at the dining table, scrolling through his phone like the conversation hadn't happened. That silence, that cold, it said more than yelling ever could. Naya stood there for a long time, her breath trembling, but no tears came, because in that moment, clarity did. This wasn't a home anymore. This was a holding cell for unspoken blame. She packed the next morning, not with rage, not with a note left on the bed. She folded her clothes neatly, wrapped her scarf collection in tissue, placed her Bible and journal in a small leather tote, and zipped her suitcase with quiet hands. Rowan didn't ask where she was going. He sat at the breakfast bar, scrolling through emails. She paused before leaving the room. "I'll be at my mother's," she said. "I need peace." Still, he said nothing, and so she walked out, not broken, but done trying to shrink herself for a man who wouldn't see her value unless it came in the form of an ultrasound photo. Her mother opened the door before she even knocked, said nothing, just stepped aside and hugged her. That night, Naya slept in her childhood bed. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the ceiling, listening to the familiar creaks of the house, breathing through the ache in her chest. When the tears did come, they weren't angry. They were tired, tired of trying to earn love, tired of walking on eggshells, tired of thinking being a wife meant accepting pain as part of the vows. Her mother brought tea the next morning, placed it by her bed, kissed her forehead, and said, "You're not the problem, baby. You just married someone who didn't know how to hold what you carried." And Naya held on to that, even as the ache stayed, even as she whispered prayers with no words. She stayed in that room, in that house, wrapped in the only place she had ever known unconditional safety. She didn't know it yet. But life was already forming its next miracle. 2 months had passed since Naya left. The quiet in her mother's house had become a sort of balm, soft and healing. The mornings came slower, wrapped in the smell of biscuits and black coffee. Her mother didn't ask invasive questions. She simply let Naya be. That space, unspoken and safe, was exactly what Naya needed. Until the quiet broke. It came on a Tuesday afternoon, wrapped in a voice she hadn't heard in years. Tamra, a friend from high school, called unexpectedly. "Girl, I'm sorry I haven't reached out sooner," she started. "I didn't know how to ask if you were okay." Naya appreciated the honesty. "I'm getting there," she said softly. There was a pause. "Well," Tamra said slowly, "I only called because you might hear it from someone else, and I didn't want that for you." "Hear what?" "He's getting married." The words didn't register at first. "Who?" "Rowan." Naya sat up straighter on her mother's couch. Tamra continued. "To that woman from his firm, Sasha or whatever her name is. It's happening fast, like, real fast. I only know because my cousin's best friend is one of the vendors doing the cake." Naya blinked slowly, trying to process. She wasn't hurt in the way she expected. Not angry, not devastated, just hollow. So that was that. He'd moved on that quickly? Had he already been moving before she even left? She didn't ask. She didn't call anyone to confirm it. She just closed her eyes and whispered, "God, let me handle this with dignity." The next day, an envelope arrived at her mother's door. No note, no handwriting, just a sleek invitation tucked inside ivory cardstock. Formal, unfeeling. Her name was listed, almost like an afterthought, as if they wanted to be able to say, "We invited her while never expecting her to come." Naya held the invitation in her hands, her thumb tracing the date. Next weekend. She placed it gently on her nightstand and stared at it for a long time. She hadn't gone looking for closure, but closure, it seemed, had sent her an invitation. The day of the wedding arrived with grey clouds hanging low over Durham's skyline. A spring rain had swept through earlier that morning, leaving everything damp and clean. Naya stood in front of her closet for nearly an hour before choosing what to wear. She didn't want to be noticed, but she also didn't want to look like someone broken. She settled on a navy blue dress, simple, long, with a high neckline and 3/4 sleeves. It clung gently to her frame, respectful but strong. She tied her scarf in a soft wrap, letting a small curl rest along her temple. She told no one where she was going, not even her mother. She just left. The wedding was held at an upscale garden venue outside the city. Everything was white. White roses, white chairs, white linen-covered tables. Guests mingled in muted pastels, heels crunching against stone pathways. Waiters carrying trays of sparkling cider and hors d'oeuvres. Naya arrived quietly. No grand entrance, no eye contact. She slipped into the back row, behind a pillar partially draped in ivy. The music had just started. The groom, Rowan, stood at the front, straight-backed and still. The bride walked in moments later, flawless in a sleek dress, her smile wide, confident. Naya didn't flinch. She didn't smile either. She just observed. From the back of the venue, where the air felt thinner and safer, she watched as two people pledged a life that, just over a year ago, Rowan had promised to her. But more than anything, she watched him, his posture, his face, his tone when he said his vows. It was all rehearsed, sharp, professional. Not once did he look uncertain. Not once did he search the crowd, and that, somehow, hurt more than anything else. He had erased her so cleanly from his story, she might as well have never existed. Still, she stayed, not to be seen, but to see, to watch a man who once made her feel like a liability now present himself to the world as settled, refined, and sure. It wasn't jealousy that kept her there, it was resolve. Sometimes the best way to move forward is to see clearly what you're leaving behind. The reception had the air of a corporate gala, chandeliers, white-gloved servers, and speeches that sounded like keynote addresses. Rowan stood tall, a flute of champagne in hand, as the crowd quieted for his toast. He cleared his throat and looked around. "Thank you all for being here," he began. "This day is important, not just because it marks a new beginning, but because it proves something." He glanced briefly around the room. "I've learned that peace comes when you stop trying to make something work that was never meant to." Naya's chest tightened. He smiled, continuing with the polished confidence of a man used to being applauded. "I'm grateful to have found someone who brings clarity, who supports growth, and who understands that love should elevate, not weigh you down." A few polite laughs, a few clinks of glasses. He wasn't done. "Some relationships," he added, "remind you what you truly need, and what you're better off letting go." Naya's eyes didn't blink. Not once. She stared straight ahead, her expression unreadable, but her heart felt every word. He wasn't talking about love. He was talking about her. And the irony? She still wasn't angry. She was simply done. She stood quietly, smoothed her dress, and began walking toward the exit before the applause could finish. She didn't wait for dessert, didn't look back, didn't try to catch his eye. He had given her the last confirmation she needed. He had rewritten their history. And now, she was free to write her own. The rain had started again by the time Naya reached the parking lot. She didn't run. She didn't cover her head. She let the water fall, cooling her skin, calming her spirit. It was done. The chapter was closed, or so she thought. 2 weeks later, Naya sat in a small clinic just outside the city. She'd been feeling nauseous for days, more fatigued than usual. At first, she blamed stress, lack of sleep, the emotional weight of the last few months. But her mother noticed the way she held her stomach, the way her appetite shifted. "Take a test, baby," she said gently, "just to know." So she did. Now, here she was, hands clasped tightly, the clock ticking slower than time should ever be allowed to. The nurse entered, chart in hand, her eyes kind. "You're pregnant," she said softly. Naya blinked. It was as if the air in the room paused. Then came the second sentence. "And..." She turned the screen of the sonogram. Naya's breath caught in her chest. "You're carrying twins. Twins, not one life. 2, not emptiness. Legacy, not rejection. Restoration." She covered her mouth as tears began to fall. Not from sorrow, but from awe. Rowan had stood in front of his new bride and declared her barren. But inside her, God had been growing proof that she was never broken. She was blessed. She left the clinic and sat in her car, letting the moment settle. No one else knew yet. Just her. Just the quiet. Just the heartbeat of 2 lives beating stronger than the shame she'd carried. Naya sat on the edge of her mother's bed, with the sonogram photos in her lap. 2 small, flickering heartbeats printed in grey and white. 2 tiny lives, and a world of fear pressing on her chest. She had replayed that clinic visit a dozen times. The nurse's words, the look on her face, The gentle excitement Naya didn't know how to return. Twins. She had walked out in silence, clutching the printouts, her eyes dry but her soul trembling. That night, long after her mother had gone to bed, Naya stood at the kitchen sink, gripping the counter with both hands. The only light came from the hood over the stove. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. She whispered aloud, "God, why now?" She wasn't married anymore. She wasn't ready. She didn't even have a job with maternity coverage. But deeper than fear was something more raw. Shame. Shame for being the woman he walked away from. Shame for still carrying the pieces of that heartbreak. Shame for being pregnant and alone and unsure of what this would mean. She held her stomach gently, as if the babies could feel her questions. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered. But that night, something shifted. Because right there in her mother's kitchen, with tears slipping down her cheeks, Naya made a decision. She wouldn't let Rowan's words define her womb. She wouldn't let the echo of rejection dictate what kind of mother she could be. She had lost her marriage. She had lost her plans. But she had not lost her purpose. And she would not run from this. In the days that followed, she didn't announce her pregnancy. She didn't post it. She didn't call friends. She sat with it, prayed over it, journaled every emotion. She let fear speak, but didn't let it win. Because deep down, she knew. This wasn't the end of her story. It was the beginning of her becoming. News travels quietly but thoroughly in communities built on prayer and porch talk. By the time Naya's second trimester began, the women in her church had already started preparing. They didn't wait for a formal announcement. They noticed the softness in her face, the way her hand rested on her belly during service, the way her mother smiled more, not because everything was perfect, but because everything was covered. Sister Helen was the first to speak up after church one Sunday. "You carrying too, ain't you?" she said, leaning in with a knowing grin. Naya's eyes widened. How do you know?" "Baby," Helen laughed. "I had 3 sets of twins in my family. I know a twin walk when I see one." That week, casseroles started showing up unannounced. Diapers appeared on the front porch in discreet brown bags. Her cousin Alicia bought a second-hand crib from a neighbor and showed up uninvited to assemble it in the guest room. "You ain't got to do this alone," Alicia said. "We don't let our own fall, not now." On Thursday nights, her mother hosted prayer circles, ostensibly for all expecting mothers, but it was clear who the oil was really being rubbed on. They laid hands on her belly. They spoke life over her. They called her blessed. And little by little, Naya began to believe it. She wasn't a mistake. She wasn't abandoned. She wasn't weak. She was becoming the kind of mother she never knew she'd have to be, one who didn't just hope things worked out, but prepared for them like they already would. The birth came on a Tuesday morning in late October. The leaves had just begun to turn amber, and the air carried that crisp edge that told you sweaters and soup season had arrived. Naya's water broke while folding a basket of baby clothes her aunt had just dropped off. She didn't panic. She just calmly called her mother, packed the overnight bag that had been sitting ready for weeks, and slid on her slippers. At the hospital, she labored for hours, and when the time came, her mother stood beside her, gripping her hand, whispering psalms through clenched teeth and contractions. At 7:19 a.m., Zuri Elise Brooks entered the world. At 7:25 a.m., Zola Eden Brooks followed. Both girls came out screaming, lungs strong, fists curled, spirits fiery from the start. Naya held them, one in each arm, her body trembling not from exhaustion, but from awe. Zuri had a slight dimple on her left cheek when she cried. Zola's lips curled up even when she slept. But it was their eyes that stopped Naya's breath. They were unmistakable. Those almond-shaped steel-grey eyes weren't hers. They were Rowan's. The irony burned for a second, but it didn't last, because those eyes, they weren't a reminder of pain. They were proof of legacy, not his, hers. She kissed each forehead. "You are loved," she whispered. "You are wanted. You are never alone." For the first time in months, Naya felt full, not in body but in soul. She had created life. She had carried it. She had delivered it. No man's absence could undo what God had built. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Zuri and Zola grew up surrounded by love. Aunties braided their hair every Sunday night. Cousins read to them after church, while greens simmered on the stove. Church mothers pinched their cheeks and called them sugar babies with power. They laughed loud. They played hard. They asked questions. And eventually, they asked about him. "Mommy, who's our dad?" The first time they asked, Naya was folding towels. She paused. She didn't lie. She didn't flinch. She sat on the floor and pulled them close. "Your father is named Rowan," she said softly. "He lives somewhere else now, but he helped make you. And for that, I'm grateful. Does he love us?" "I think he doesn't know you yet," Nia answered. "But if he ever does, he won't be able to help it." She didn't embellish. She didn't shame. She gave truth, wrapped in dignity. Because Naya had made a promise to herself the day she left Rowan's home, her daughters would never carry the weight of her pain. They would never inherit bitterness wrapped as protection. They would know their story, not just the parts that hurt, but the ones that healed. She raised them on love, not resentment. Because Naya had learned something most people never do, you don't need revenge to feel restored. You just need peace. And a love that's big enough to break the cycle. Naya didn't have time to break. Motherhood demanded more than grief could allow. From the moment Zuri and Zola entered the world, life became a series of decisions, some small, some stretching her faith like never before. At first it was overwhelming. Midnight feedings with no one to pass the bottle to. Doctor visits where she had to carry 2 car seats on her own. Trying to get the girls to nap at the same time so she could do laundry without interruption. But Naya found her rhythm. Not overnight, but day by day, hour by hour. She picked up part-time work tutoring GED students at the same community center where she once volunteered. The hours were flexible, the pay modest, but it allowed her to do what she loved while staying close to her girls. When the twins were old enough to crawl, she brought them to study groups with a playpen in the corner. Students didn't complain. They welcomed the energy. Some even helped rock them between math lessons and reading exercises. Her village never disappeared. Her mother watched the girls when Nia had to teach late. Her cousin Alicia helped her navigate childcare forms. One of the deacons at church offered to fix her brakes when her car started squealing. No one asked for anything in return. They just showed up. And slowly, she built a life. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. She kept her expenses tight. She applied for assistance where needed. She stocked up during grocery sales and learned how to stretch meals without sacrificing nutrition. She didn't chase the illusion of having it all. She prioritized peace. Some days were harder than others, but every night, after the girls were asleep, she would stand over their crib and whisper, "You are covered. You are safe. You are not missing anything." Because in that small, sunlit home on a quiet Durham street, they had everything that mattered. Zuri and Zola grew fast, not just in size, but in soul. Zuri, the older by 6 minutes, had rhythm in her bones. By 3, she was clapping in time with the choir on Sunday mornings. By 4, she was beating wooden spoons on pots like they were drums. And by 5, she had memorized every hymn Naya ever hummed while folding clothes. She had a musical ear, but more than that, she had heart. Zuri loved people. She hugged freely, danced without needing music, and lit up any room she walked into. Zola, on the other hand, was quieter, but observant in a way that caught everyone off guard. She didn't ask many questions. She waited, watched, and then asked the one question that mattered. She liked taking things apart, toys, old remotes, even Nia's hairdryer once, just to see how they worked. She was always holding something, twisting it in her hand, eyes wide with curiosity. But both girls shared something deeper than DNA. They shared a joy that couldn't be taught. They laughed often, forgave quickly, and asked questions that tugged at Naya's heart. "Mommy, why do we say grace before we eat if God already knows we're thankful? Do angels talk to babies before they can talk to us?" Naya answered as best she could. She didn't pretend to have all the answers. She simply spoke with honesty and heart. And when she didn't know, she said, Let's pray and ask together. At school, the girls thrived. Zuri joined the children's choir and was often chosen to lead opening songs. Zola joined a science club and asked for a microscope on her birthday. Teachers complimented Nia during every parent-teacher conference. They're smart, but more than that, they're kind. Nia always smiled, knowing exactly why. Because they weren't raised in wealth, they were raised in truth, and it showed. Community events became a staple in Nia's life, not just for her, but for the girls. Fall harvest festivals, church cookouts, school fundraisers, local cultural fairs. She never missed them. Not to show off, but to be present. She'd help run booths, organize book drives, serve plates at fish fries. Always involved, never loud. People respected her. Not just for how she raised her daughters, but for how she carried herself, with quiet assurance. She didn't walk into rooms needing to be seen. She walked into rooms prepared to contribute. And though she crossed paths with people who once whispered about her situation, the quiet, divorce, the mysterious pregnancy, the unanswered questions, Nia never flinched. When asked why the girls had her last name only, she'd answer calmly, because that's how God assigned us. No shame, no hesitation, just truth. At one event, a woman who used to attend the same church as Rowan approached her. She looked uncomfortable, wringing her hands as she spoke. "I didn't know everything that happened back then," she said gently, "but you've carried yourself with more grace than I think I could have." Nia just nodded. "I wasn't called to be bitter," she said. "I was called to be whole." The woman blinked, then smiled through wet eyes. "I hope he knows what he lost." Nia didn't reply. She wasn't interested in what Rowan knew or didn't know. She was too busy building a life that didn't revolve around absence. Rowan Hale had not crossed her mind in months, not because she forced him out, but because there was no space for what didn't grow her. Her focus had shifted so fully, from pain to purpose, from wounds to wisdom, that even when his name came up in old conversations or accidental online sightings, it landed like dust instead of weight. Until one morning, a cream-colored envelope arrived in her mailbox. It wasn't addressed personally, just her full name, printed cleanly. Inside was an invitation, formal, embossed, sealed with gold. The annual Durham Youth Development Gala, a benefit, a networking opportunity, a celebration of sponsors, mentors, and long-term contributors. She'd attended once, years ago, before the divorce. Back when Rowan's firm had donated heavily to the education fund, she almost tossed the invite. But then she saw the header, honoring Rowan Hale, lead donor and keynote speaker. She stared at the name for a long time, not with anger, but curiosity. Zuri and Zola were 8 now. 8 years of growing into the very life he once claimed she could never give him. 8 years since he stood in front of a crowd and declared her incapable. And now he would be standing again, this time receiving applause. Nia didn't feel rage. She didn't feel the need for revenge. But a whisper in her spirit said, "Go," not to prove a point, not to be seen, but because the truth always stands taller when it walks in quietly. By the time Rowan Hale turned 39, his name had become a fixture in North Carolina's corporate circles. He had climbed his way up from senior associate to partner at one of the most competitive consulting firms in the Southeast. His face appeared in local business journals. He spoke at conferences. He gave calculated interviews that made headlines without ever saying too much. Polished, composed, strategic. His wardrobe was sharp, tailored suits in dark tones, always paired. With minimal accessories and a silver wristwatch he wore like armor. He carried himself with the kind of control that made people think twice before challenging him. At networking events, he smiled just enough to be approachable. His handshakes were firm, his tone measured, his attention always divided, half on the conversation, half scanning the room for who else mattered. He didn't talk about his first marriage. He didn't mention Durham outside of business. He never corrected those who assumed he had no children. Rowan had built an image, one that erased his past. He owned 2 condos, one in Charlotte and another in Raleigh. He leased a new vehicle every 2 years and dined at places with waiting lists. He attended only the highest profile events, and only when it served his long-term strategy. He was, by all outward appearances, successful, but he was also distant. No one really knew what he did outside of work. He rarely brought dates to galas. He rarely stayed long after speeches. He never lingered in personal conversations. His success had become a shield, and no one dared ask what it was protecting him from, until the invitation for the Durham Youth Gala arrived, an event where his old firm had once sponsored programs where his name still held weight. The committee reached out, eager to honor him as a lead donor and speaker. He accepted with little thought. Another appearance, another microphone, another moment to confirm that Rowan Hale had arrived. What he didn't know was that the very past he buried was walking straight back into the room. The gala was held at the Magnolia Crest Hotel, a historic landmark with marble pillars and gold-trimmed ceilings. Waiters in black ties moved like clockwork through a ballroom lined with white tablecloths and soft lighting. Guests arrived in formal gowns and tailored tuxedos. And at exactly 6:43 p.m., Naya stepped through the entrance. She wore an emerald green dress, simple in design but powerful in presence. The color wrapped around her like confidence itself, highlighting the softness in her face and the quiet strength in her walk. Her scarf was tied high, knotted to the side, with gold pins lining the edge. No heavy makeup, no glitter, just radiance earned through years of walking through fire and never burning. Zuri held her right hand, Zola her left. The girls were dressed in coordinated satin dresses, cream and gold, with little ballet flats that clicked gently on the marble floor. Their hair was styled in neat buns with flower clips that matched their mother's scarf. Heads turned, not because they recognized her, but because the sight of the 3 of them entering together, composed, elegant, untouched by chaos, was unforgettable. Naya didn't look around for attention. She simply led her daughters toward the far side of the ballroom, found their assigned table, and sat. She greeted the other guests kindly, introducing herself only as Naya Brooks. No backstory, no claim to anyone in the room. Zuri giggled softly when the waiter poured sparkling water. Zola asked how long until the music would start. They didn't feel out of place, because they had been raised to believe they belonged wherever love led them. Naya took a breath, surveying the room. She saw faces she hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Some she recognized from church, others from community events back when her life still included Rowan. But she didn't flinch, didn't shrink, because tonight wasn't about the past. It was about showing her daughters what grace looked like, even in rooms that once tried to erase you. Rowan took the stage just after the dinner plates were cleared. He stood tall in front of the podium, thanking the donors, acknowledging the volunteers, delivering his speech with poise and polish. His voice carried well in the room, smooth, commanding, absent of emotion, until the moment his eyes shifted and locked on a table near the back. For a split second, he froze. His throat dried. The next line of his speech vanished, because there, seated quietly, calmly, as if she'd always belonged there, was Naya, and beside her, 2 girls. 2 girls with familiar almond-shaped eyes, with expressions he knew from old photographs, with laughter that sounded too much like his when he still knew how to laugh. One of them tilted her head the same way he did during boardroom pauses. The other clenched her jaw when she was thinking, a habit he'd had since college. His hands trembled around the edge of the podium, though he masked it quickly. He finished the last lines of his speech, but his voice had lost its rhythm. The room still applauded when he stepped down, but he didn't hear it. He couldn't take his eyes off that table. He didn't walk toward her. Not right away. He sat down, gripped the edge of his seat, tried to piece together what was happening. Twins? His twins? He looked again. Zuri and Zola were smiling at something Nia whispered to them. And for the first time in years, Rowan Hale had no control, no script, no power, just a flood of recognition, and a memory of the night he humiliated her without knowing she was carrying everything he claimed she couldn't give him. It wasn't until the event was nearly over that Rowan gathered enough resolve to walk over. He waited until the music had slowed, until most people had migrated toward the dessert bar or outside for pictures. He approached carefully, unsure of what he'd say, unsure if she'd even acknowledge him. Naya looked up before he spoke. Her gaze was steady. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She simply looked at him like a woman who had already healed. "Nah," he said quietly, unsure if the sound of his own voice would betray the panic building in his chest. She nodded once. "Rowan." He glanced down at the girls. Zuri looked back at him curiously. Zola tilted her head. He cleared his throat. They look like... "They're yours," Naya said softly, not as a weapon, not to hurt, but simply to say what was true. Rowan blinked. "What?" She stood, placing a hand gently on each girl's shoulder. "Zuri, Zola, this is Rowan." The girls looked up at him. Naya continued, voice even. "He's your father." Silence stretched between them. Rowan stared at them, his hands twitching at his sides, his lips parting as if to speak. But no words came. Zuri raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. "Are you the one who made Mommy sad?" Naya gently squeezed her shoulder. "We'll talk later," she said. Rowan finally found his voice. "I didn't know. Why didn't you—" Naya cut him off, but with grace. "You weren't ready to know," she said. "And I wasn't called to chase you." He looked like he might collapse right there, the polished exterior crumbling under the weight of a truth too long ignored. Zola tilted her head. "You have the same eyes as me," she whispered. Rowan swallowed hard. Naya knelt between the girls. "It's time to go, babies." They gathered their coats. Rowan stood frozen as they walked past him, and as Naya reached the exit, she paused. Without turning, she said, "Now that you've seen them, what you do next will say more about you than any speech ever could." She walked out, head high, daughters in hand, grace intact. And Rowan stood alone, finally seeing what his pride had cost him. The gala ended, but Rowan Hale didn't leave with his usual air of control. As the limousine pulled away from the Grand Hotel's entrance, silence stretched thick in the back seat. His assistant spoke briefly about follow-ups and press photos, but Rowan didn't respond. His mind was a battlefield of memories, each image of Naya and those twin girls pressing against the rawest corners of his heart. Zuri and Zola. Their names hadn't left his head since Naya uttered them. His daughters, his own daughters. He hadn't blinked when Naya stood before him, radiant and composed. He hadn't spoken when the girls looked up at him with bright, questioning eyes, his same hazel gaze staring back. He couldn't, because what could he possibly say? "I didn't know. I wasn't ready. I said awful things, and you had every right to leave without telling me." None of it was enough. Once home, Rowan didn't sleep. He paced his penthouse with its perfect glass walls, expensive floors, and soulless stillness. His success mocked him now. Every deal he'd won, every headline that praised him, every accolade on the wall, none of it meant anything when he'd failed at the one thing that actually mattered, showing up. He ran a hand through his hair and sat heavily at his desk, the one with his father's antique globe in the corner. Rowan opened his private files and searched her name. There she was. Naya Fields, her resume, her transfer file. He had the access now. He could trace everything, except the missing years. He remembered the last words he spoke to her in that office, cold, sharp, delivered like strategy. She had walked away that day with more dignity than he deserved. He hadn't asked where she was going, hadn't followed up when she never returned. He had written it off as a clean break. It wasn't clean. It was cruel. And now? Now he was a stranger to two beautiful girls who shared his blood. He leaned back in the chair, breathing shallowly, grief swelling in his chest. He hadn't even held them, hadn't rocked them to sleep, hadn't heard their first words or seen their first steps. There had been birthdays, school performances, bedtime stories, and he had missed them all. He had no idea what flavor ice cream they liked. It wasn't just guilt, it was the bitter taste of his own character revealed in reflection. And for the first time in a long while, Rowan Hale didn't feel powerful. He felt small. Rowan didn't wait long to reach out. He couldn't. He wrote the first email at 3:14 a.m. The message was simple, formal, yet hesitant. Naya, I would appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, privately, at your convenience. Rowan Hale. He deleted it. He rewrote it again. This time he added, I saw myself in their laughter. I don't want to disrupt your world, but I want to understand it. He hovered, then hit send. The response came a day later. Rowan, I appreciate you reaching out, but I need time and space. This isn't about you, it's about what's best for the girls. Naya. No accusation, no bitterness. Just clarity. Still, it stung. He responded carefully, asking for updates, if she would consider letting him meet the girls someday. Not now, just someday. Naya replied, You don't need to rush this. The girls have a routine, a rhythm. I've kept their world simple, honest and loving. I need to protect that. The way she said it wasn't defensive. It was motherly, grounded, loving. It made him ache more. But Rowan understood something new that week. He wasn't entitled to access. Not to Naya's life. Not even to the children she had raised alone. He had to earn it. And no title, no money, no prestige could accelerate that process. So he waited. He read parenting articles late into the night, watched old videos of toddler milestones, listened to interviews with men who had re-entered their children's lives. None of it calmed him, because he had yet to prove anything, not to the world, but to the two little girls who didn't know his name. His memory had never failed him, until now he wished it would. Rowan stood alone in his office, the city skyline beyond his glass windows stretching like a lie he once believed. In the quiet, it came back like an echo, that day, in that corner office, when Naya's voice cracked as she asked for understanding. And he, in all his pride, had dismissed her. You think your feelings override facts. Business doesn't run on sentiment. He had said those words. He had watched her flinch. She wasn't trying to trap him or manipulate him. She was trying to tell him something. And he didn't listen. He remembered her pause, her inhale, how she'd folded her hands over her belly before she turned and walked out. He hadn't even asked if she was okay. He hadn't asked anything. Now, every quiet moment felt like punishment. His phone no longer rang with her voice. His home had no sound of tiny feet or laughter. He didn't even know if Zuri or Zola preferred cartoons or coloring books. The punishment was not being hated. It was being forgotten. He attended a corporate gala later that week, and when asked by a board member what legacy he hoped to leave, Rowan nearly choked on the question. Legacy. He had twin daughters who might never call him dad. What legacy? He declined the after-party, went home, sat on the edge of his bed and stared into the dark, and realized silence wasn't just what she had given him. It was what he had earned. Naya sat on the back porch of her home, barefoot, a warm tea in her hand, the twins asleep inside. It had been 2 weeks since the gala. Zuri still talked about the man in the tuxedo with the sad eyes. Zola had drawn a picture of him in her sketchbook. They didn't understand what happened, not fully. Naya hadn't burdened them with explanations, but she knew children saw what adults tried to hide. She had given Rowan a wide berth, not to punish him, but to protect the peace she had built. Forgiveness didn't require closeness. She wasn't bitter. She had released that long ago, but she wasn't available for unfinished men who only showed up after seeing reflections of themselves in children. She had paid in labor, loneliness, long nights with fevers and first teeth. She had earned her motherhood in full, and she would not hand over her daughters like a trophy now that they were beautiful and visible. She believed in truth, and the truth was, Rowan had a chance, and he lost it. That didn't make him a monster. It made him human. But it didn't mean she had to offer herself again. She could be kind. She could leave doors unlocked. But she wouldn't hold them open anymore. She closed her eyes, breathing in the quiet strength of that truth. and for the first time in years, she smiled, not because of what she had survived, but because of what she had chosen to build. Rowan Hale stood outside the modest red-brick elementary school, hands tucked awkwardly into the pockets of his navy overcoat. His luxury town car was parked several blocks away, intentionally. He didn't want attention, didn't want to disrupt anything. He just wanted to witness. Through the large glass windows of the multi-purpose room, he could see the school play was already in motion. The homemade decorations, the cardboard stars taped above the stage, the uneven singing, it was all beautifully imperfect. And right in the center, wearing a gold paper crown, was Zuri. Her voice rose a little louder than the rest. She wasn't pitch perfect, but she sang like she meant it. To her left, Zola twirled once too many times, losing her cue but catching it with a grin. Rowan's heart clenched. He stayed outside, peering in, hidden behind a column. He didn't want Naya to see him. Not yet. He hadn't earned that right, but he was there. The next week, he mailed the twins 2 handwritten letters, one each. On soft pastel cards, he wrote without trying to impress. He told Zola how her twirls reminded him of when he used to trip over his own feet as a child. He told Zuri that her voice was brave, just like her mother. He ended both letters the same way. I don't want to force anything. I just want to know you, if you'll let me. Rowan. He mailed them from across town so Nia wouldn't feel cornered. And still, he didn't stop there. He began showing up at the local community church, not with security, not in a suit, but as a man trying to learn how to serve. He helped sweep after the Sunday breakfasts. He refilled trays. He held doors. Quiet, present, patient. Not once did he bring up Naya, but everyone knew why he was there. Even Pastor Langston, who narrowed his eyes the first 3 weeks and then nodded silently the 4th. Rowan was climbing, but the mountain he'd torn down with his pride couldn't be rebuilt overnight. It wasn't at a fancy venue. It wasn't planned. The apology happened on the back steps of Naya's mother's house on a quiet Saturday afternoon. Zola and Zuri were playing with sidewalk chalk near the driveway. Naya was sitting on the porch steps, her legs stretched out in front of her, a glass of lemonade in hand. Her eyes had seen long days, but they still carried fire. Rowan approached slowly, respectfully. May I sit? She didn't move. It's your world, Rowan. You always walked where you pleased. He accepted that, sat 2 steps below her. Silence. He watched the girls laughing, their voices high and light. I've never been more ashamed of myself than the moment I saw them and knew, he said. Knew I had missed years I'll never get back. Not because of fate, not because of chance, but because of ego. Naya stared ahead, her jaw clenched but composed. I didn't come to make you feel bad for me, he added, and I don't expect you to forgive me quickly. I just wanted to say, I saw it now, all of it, you, them, and the pain I caused you. She still didn't speak, but she didn't walk away either. I thought I was powerful, Naya, he continued, but I couldn't even hold on to decency when you needed it most. You carried twins, alone, humiliated, and I threw you away like your worth was measured by my trust issues. This time, her breath hitched. And I just want you to know, Rowan said softly, voice cracking. I see you now. I see what I was too proud and blind to see before. Naya didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was quiet. You can't undo what you did, but maybe you can start with who you are now. Rowan nodded, rising without expectation. It was the first time Nia didn't shut the door behind him as he left. Mommy, how come he never came to see us when we were babies? It was Zuri who asked the question one quiet night while braiding Zola's hair. Naya was folding laundry on the bed, the girls freshly bathed and in pajamas. Zola didn't speak, but she paused, her eyes wide and waiting. Naya sat on the edge of the bed, her voice calm. That's a very important question. Zuri nodded slowly. It's okay, Mom. I wonder. All the other kids at school had daddies when they were little. Naya put the clothes down and pulled the girls close. Rowan didn't know about you two when you were born, she began gently. By the time I realized I was pregnant, Things between me and him had gone very wrong. He said things that hurt me very badly, and I didn't think it was safe, for my heart or yours, to bring him into our lives. I chose to raise you on my own. Zola tilted her head. But he's here now. Yes, and he's trying to be part of your lives, trying to understand what he missed. It doesn't erase the past, but it can shape the future. Zuri looked at her sister, then at her mother. Do you still love him? Naya didn't lie. I care about him. I love who you are because of me and because of him. But sometimes love has to wait until there's respect, and sometimes it doesn't come back at all. Zola asked the last question that night, her voice soft. If we want him in our life, will that hurt you? Naya pulled them both in, arms wrapping tight. Never. I want you to know your father. I want you to grow with love, not with silence. What matters most is that you feel safe, seen and cherished. The girls curled into her arms. And for the first time, Naya allowed herself to cry, not from sadness, but from the courage it took to answer them truthfully. It started with weekend walks in the park. Rowan showed up early, dressed casually, a backpack slung over one shoulder filled with coloring books, snacks and juice boxes. He let Zola lead the conversations. She had the most questions, and Zuri set the pace, sometimes skipping ahead but always circling back. Naya watched from a distance at first. Then she began to join them, never too close, never too far. The next phase was school drop-offs. Rowan asked politely if he could alternate Mondays. Naya agreed, cautiously. There were rules, no gifts without discussion, no promises he couldn't keep, no overnight visits yet. He obeyed every rule without resistance. When the girls got sick one week, Rowan brought soup and sat quietly on the couch, letting Naya do the mothering. He read them stories, holding Zuri's hand until she drifted to sleep. He cleaned up before he left. Still, Naya kept her boundaries. He never crossed them. At a local art showcase, Zuri's painting won third place. Rowan stood beside Naya as the announcer called her name. Their shoulders brushed briefly. He looked at her, then quickly away. Not yet. That night, as he dropped them off, Rowan whispered, "Thank you for trusting me with parts of their lives." Naya replied with a simple nod. She had allowed shared parenting, not romance. Her heart wasn't ready for that, but for now, it was enough that he finally showed up, and stayed. Rowan Hale no longer entered rooms like he used to. No grand entrances, no commanding presence that demanded everyone fall silent. At the community center's spring art fair, he arrived quietly, carrying juice boxes and a smile that trembled at the edges. Zuri was the first to notice him. She didn't run, didn't wave, but she nudged her sister, and together they whispered behind their art easel. Rowan stood still, not moving an inch closer. He wasn't there to win them over with money or charm. He waited. The next week, it was Jaina who approached. She handed him a drawing, him holding their hands. The lines were crooked, the colors messy, but the message was whole. "You remembered my eyes," Rowan whispered, kneeling to her level. "Mom said they're where I got mine," Jaina replied with a grin. From there, small threads formed. A walk home from school, a Saturday at the botanical garden, building paper rockets in the garage. Rowan didn't try to replace anyone. He simply showed up, again and again. When the girls sang at their church's youth choir day, he sat in the third pew, eyes glossy, hands clenched, heart wide open. And when the applause ended, they both ran to him first. He didn't cry, not in front of them, but in his car, parked just around the corner, Rowan bowed his head and wept. Not from guilt, from gratitude. He was finally being allowed into their world, one moment at a time. Naya stood back, not from pride, not from anger, but from earned wisdom. She had seen promises made before, grand gestures, beautiful apologies, poetic declarations, and yet none of them had ever raised her daughters. None had held their hands during fevers, or taught them how to braid each other's hair. So she didn't lean into Rowan's words. She leaned into his presence. Week after week, She saw him arrive before the girls even stepped out of school. She noticed how he packed their lunch on field trip days. She watched from her window as he picked up litter after church events, not caring who saw him. Rowan had changed, not into someone new, but into someone intentional. He still wore designer shoes, still drove a sleek black SUV, but now he walked at the pace of two giggling girls, not the speed of power. One night, after a parent-teacher meeting, he waited outside her house. He didn't come inside. He stood by the gate, hands in pockets. "I won't overstep," he said when she approached. "But if the girls need new math books, I'd like to help." Naya didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked, "What do they like most about you?" He paused, then chuckled softly. "Jaina said I make silly voices." Zuri said, "I listen." Naya's shoulders softened, not because she missed him, but because she saw a man beginning to understand that love wasn't performance, it was reliability. And finally, he was showing it. It was after Zuri's school project night, a solar system diorama that had taken 3 weeks and 1,000 glue sticks. Rowan helped carry the foam planets back to Naya's car. The girls ran ahead, chasing the moonlight, laughing about Saturn's rings. He lingered by the passenger door, rubbing his hands nervously. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable," he said, voice low. Naya arched a brow. "You're already pacing." He smiled. "I guess that's fair." He met her eyes, not as the man who once crushed her heart, but as someone who had learned what it meant to truly value a woman. "I've watched you raise them with dignity. I've seen how you chose strength when it would have been easier to collapse. I don't deserve a second chance at romance, but may I try to earn the right to? Court you again? Not as a favor, not because of the girls, but because I know now, love should never have humiliated you, and I intend to love you with reverence this time, if you ever allow it." Naya didn't answer immediately. She didn't need to. The silence that followed was not awkward. It was sacred. She nodded slowly. Not a promise, not a yes, but a beginning. 2 weeks passed. Rowan remained consistent, dropping off lunches, showing up at community events, laughing freely with the girls but never forcing space where Naya hadn't given it. On a sunny Saturday morning, Naya stood outside the local farmer's market with the twins. Rowan approached with 3 cups of strawberry lemonade. "Peace offering," he teased. "I'm not mad," Naya said calmly. "I know. But I still like being thoughtful." Jaina tugged at her hand. "Mom, can Mr. Rowan walk with us?" Rowan chuckled. "Only if your mom says yes." Naya looked at him, then down at her daughters, both watching with expectant grins. "I suppose you can walk," she said softly, then added, "but no hand-holding just yet." His smile lit up like the summer sky. "Understood," he replied, stepping in rhythm beside them. Later that evening, he sent a simple text. "Thank you for today, not just for allowing me to walk beside you, but for giving me the dignity to earn your space." Naya stared at the screen for a while before typing. "Let's take it one day at a time. I'm not rushing love, but I'm no longer afraid to see where healing might lead." And with that, the rebuilding began. No fireworks, no fairy tales, just love. Slowly, on her terms, one earned moment at a time. The sky held no tension that Sunday. The park, nestled in a quiet corner of the city, buzzed with the laughter of children, the hum of cicadas, and the soft rustle of trees. But for Naya, it was the sound of calm that made her heart pause. The kind of quiet joy that came after a storm had passed, not before it. Rowan stood near the portable grill, spatula in hand, flipping burgers with exaggerated seriousness. His apron read, "Grill Sergeant, Commander of the BBQ." Jaina had picked it out last weekend from a dollar store with pride, claiming he needed more dad clothes. A few yards away, the twins darted across the grass barefoot, chasing bubbles, butterflies, and each other. Jaina had a daisy tucked behind her ear. Zuri was mid-cartwheel, yelling, "That one didn't count." My hand slipped. Rowan watched them between burger flips, his eyes tracking every movement like a man who knew exactly what he'd almost lost and was never taking it for granted again. On a plaid blanket under the shade of a maple tree, Naya leaned back on her, elbows, sunglasses on, sipping lemonade with her legs crossed and her soul still. She hadn't always believed peace was possible, but somehow it had found her, in Rowan's consistent presence, in her daughter's healing, laughter, and in her own decision to release the pain without forgetting the lesson. Her phone buzzed beside her. A text from her sister. "You look at peace. You deserve every bit of it." Naya smiled and looked up again. Zuri ran toward Rowan and hugged his leg without warning. Jaina followed, declaring, "Dad, you're burning the buns." He exaggerated a gasp. "Commander never burns." Laughter exploded. And Naya smiled, not because the world was perfect now, but because she was no longer waiting for perfection to breathe freely. She was living, after everyone had eaten and the girls had settled into a daisy-picking contest. Rowan excused himself to grab something from the car. Naya watched him curiously as he returned, not with jewelry, not with another gesture, but with a folded letter in his hand. "I've been holding on to this," he said, standing before her. But today felt like the day. He looked toward the girls, then back to her. "I'm not asking for a second proposal today, but I owe you this, and I need to say it out loud. Not just for you, for them too." He knelt, not for ceremony but out of respect. Then, quietly but firmly, Rowan read, "Nia, on our wedding day, I humiliated the very woman who carried my legacy inside her. I was blind with pride, insecure in ways I didn't understand then, and quick to protect my image over your honor. You gave me daughters. You gave me years of your silence so they could grow in peace. I didn't deserve that grace, but you gave it. I know no letter can erase the weight you carried alone, but I want our girls to know that their mother stood tall, even when I tried to tear her down, and that their father became a man only because she chose not to destroy him when she had every right to. I love you, Nia, whether you ever wear my name again or not. I will love you like a man who has learned what love truly requires." He folded the letter, looked up. Naya said nothing. She stepped forward and placed her hand gently on his shoulder. "Stand up," she whispered. "You already did something greater than propose. You told the truth." Behind them, Jaina and Zuri clapped, even though they didn't fully understand what just happened. But they would. One day, they would. The stage was small. Nothing fancy, just a circle of folding chairs in a community room downtown. The banner behind her read, rising from it, "Women's Voices, Women's Victory." Naya wore a soft blue blouse and simple pants. No labels, no glam, just her, as she'd always been, plain-spoken, poised and powerful in her own way. The room was packed with women, some with strollers, some with scars, some with fresh wounds still bleeding beneath business suits. The moderator handed her the mic. Naya took a breath. "I was once the bride with swollen feet, swollen hopes, and a secret growing inside me. On my wedding day, the man I loved used that moment to protect his ego, not my heart." Murmurs filled the space, but I didn't stay there. I walked through grief, raised twins on my own, built a life with integrity. And when that same man came back, I didn't fall into the past. I watched his growth. I let time prove the change. A hand raised from the audience. "What made you forgive him?" Naya smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for him first. I did it for me, so that bitterness wouldn't keep robbing me of beauty. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It's just choosing not to carry the weight anymore." The room went silent. She closed the session with this: "I once thought the miracle I carried needed to be defended, but now I know. It was never a burden to justify. It was a calling. I didn't just survive humiliation. I raised 2 daughters who now know what strength looks like, because they saw it in me." Tears welled in the eyes of many, and as she stepped off that stage, her phone buzzed again. A message from Rowan. "They'll never forget what you said today." "Neither will I." Later that evening, Naya sat alone on the back porch. The twins were asleep. Rowan had left hours ago after tucking them in and whispering bedtime stories about stars and brave queens. She sipped her tea slowly, eyes scanning the stars above, heart full, not of fantasies, of legacy, because she knew now what others mocked had always been a miracle in disguise. She spoke softly into the quiet night, a whisper meant for her daughters, and perhaps for anyone who'd ever been broken and blamed for it. The miracle they mocked was the legacy I was called to raise, and now I raise them, not from pain, but from power. Comment below. Have you ever been insulted or abandoned, only to rise stronger than before? Let your story remind someone. Grace doesn't mean weakness.